All right, let's talk about something huge today. We're going to dive into how a simple piece of paper, or really just a number on a screen, can become one of the most powerful geopolitical weapons in the world. Yep, we're talking about the weaponization of the US dollar. So how on earth did a currency get this much power?
And look, this isn't some abstract idea. Just look at that number, $300 billion. That's roughly how much of Russia's own central bank assets were frozen by Western nations back in 2022. That single move sent a massive shockwave through the entire global financial system. It was a wake-up call, proving that a country's own money isn't necessarily safe if it's held in dollars or euros when a conflict breaks out.
So you have to ask, how is that even possible? How can a currency, something we all just use for trade and investment, be turned into a tool of coercion? Well, the answer isn't in the cash itself. It's in the hidden infrastructure, the plumbing, that moves all that money around the globe.
To really get this, we first have to peel back the curtain and look at the dollar's hidden power. It's not just that it's valuable, it's that it's at the absolute center of the world's financial plumbing.
I mean, just look at this chart. It's sheer dominance. Over 80% of all global trade is financed using US dollars. It doesn't matter if you're a company in India buying oil from the UAE or a firm in Brazil selling coffee to Japan, chances are that transaction is happening in dollars. And that, well, that creates incredible leverage.
And this right here is exactly what we mean when we say financial weaponization. It's using that dominance over the system strategically to put political pressure on others. It's all about controlling the pipes and the valves of global finance to, cut off your adversaries from doing business with the rest of the world.
So how does the US actually pull this off? Let's take a look at the specific tools in what you could call the US financial arsenal. These are the key choke points in the dollar system that can be squeezed to apply that pressure.
Okay, it basically boils down to three main mechanisms. First, you've got exclusion from a messaging system called SWIFT. Second, control over something called correspondent banks. And third, and this is the real big one, is the use of secondary sanctions. Let's break them down.
Now, the impact of that first choke point, getting kicked off of SWIFT, is just devastating. See, SWIFT isn't a bank. It's more like a super secure WhatsApp for banks to send payment instructions. So when you cut a country's banks off from SWIFT, like what happened with Iran and Russia, it effectively makes them deaf and mute on the world stage. They just can't communicate to send or receive international payments. Game over.
But the most powerful weapon of all has got to be secondary sanctions. This is where things get really interesting. The US can go to a bank in, say, China or Germany and say, hey, if you do business with this sanctioned company in Iran, we will cut you off from the entire US dollar system. For that bank, the choice becomes pretty simple. Lose one client or lose access to 80% of global trade. It pretty much forces everyone, even neutral countries, to fall in line.
Now, as you can imagine, this level of power has definitely triggered a reaction. It's not a one-sided story. Nations, especially countries like China, Russia, India, the BRICS bloc, and others in the global south, are now actively building their own parallel financial systems to protect themselves from these risks. And you can see the shift pretty clearly here. The old way, the one we've known for decades, relied on SWIFT, on US correspondent banks, and of course on settling everything in dollars. The new way? Well, it aims to replace every single one of those components with alternatives, different messaging systems, direct digital currency swaps, and settling trade in their own local money. This table really breaks down the different strategies. Look at that first row, China's CIPS and Russia's SBFS. Those are direct alternatives to SWIFT, built so their banks can talk to each other internationally without ever touching the Western-controlled network. Then you have countries trading directly in their own currencies, like India and the UAE using rupees and dirhams for oil deals, completely sidestepping the dollar. And finally, you have the really high-tech stuff, central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, being tested in projects like mBridge.
And here's a really crucial part of this whole story, the direct challenge to the petrodollar. That's the decades-old agreement that oil is pretty much always priced in dollars. So when China and Saudi Arabia start talking about pricing oil in the Chinese yuan, that is a major shot across the bow. At the very same time, central banks all over the world are hedging their bets by buying up tons of physical gold, an asset that exists outside any single country's financial control.
So what's the technological endgame in this whole counteroffensive? Well, it looks a lot like Project mBridge. This thing uses central bank digital currencies on a shared platform. It would let countries like China and the UAE settle a trade instantly and directly, completely bypassing the old system. No SWIFT message, no U.S. bank in the middle, and, this is the key part, no U.S. visibility or veto power.
Okay, so all of this sounds pretty revolutionary, right? But before we go and declare the end of the dollar's reign, we need a serious reality check. Because as it turns out, replacing a system this deeply embedded in the world economy is way, way harder than it looks.
Which brings us to the big question, the one everyone's asking. Is the dollar's reign actually over?
Well, the reality is a lot more complicated. The short answer is no, not really. And the reasons why are all about these incredible structural advantages the dollar system has built up over decades. Let's dig into these hurdles because they are formidable. First, you've got the powerful network effect. Simply put, everyone uses the dollar because everyone else uses the dollar. It just makes life easier, but it's way deeper than that. There's also unmatched liquidity. U.S. financial markets are the deepest on the planet. You can buy or sell billions in U.S. bonds in a heartbeat without moving the price. No other market can offer that kind of stability. And then, the alternatives themselves are fragmented. China's SIPs and Russia's SPFS don't even talk to each other easily. And finally, the political headwinds are huge. I mean, trying to create a unified BRICS currency, that's a massive political mountain to climb. Ultimately, a reserve currency runs on trust. Trust in the stability and the rule of law of the country that issues it. And that's the highest hurdle of all.
So, if the dollar isn't going to be replaced outright, then what is the future? Well, the most likely outcome isn't a replacement, but a fragmentation. We seem to be heading towards a new, more multipolar financial world order.
You can almost picture it as two major zones operating in parallel. On one side, you have the dollar zone, US, Europe, Japan, and their allies. It's super efficient, deeply integrated, but it's also subject to US foreign policy. And on the other side, you have this growing sanctions-proof zone, with countries like China, Russia, and Iran operating outside of US reach, using that whole new suite of tools we talked about, digital currencies, gold, and local trade.
So what does this all mean in the real world? It means we're heading for a more complex, more fractured world for anyone doing global business. A world where a deal might be settled in dollars one day, yuan the next, and maybe even a brand new digital rupee the day after that.
And as these two systems grow and diverge, the connections, or the lack of connections, between them will become the new strategic battleground. It leaves us with a really profound question for the 21st century. In a divided financial world, how will value flow?